I'm going to slide it back over to her as soon as I'm done. Okay, we're just waiting a minute or two for those people on Zoom to be able to get the program. So I'm Tom, actually. I'm the president of the Redlands Area Historical Society. We have had a really busy week. We were, the old house group was at the Gold Banner Packing House at 215 East Redlands Boulevard this past week. And of course, a packing house is a house. And so we got to go inside. Of course, Yamaha and Indian Motorcycle is there today. And then we explained everything that the packing house manager did, and then what was in the packing house. All that was arranged by Kathleen Beal, who is our new old house person. On November 5th, Kathleen and JP Beal are going to have a walking tour of mid-century churches in the downtown. So November 5th at 2 o'clock, starting in front of Holy Name of Jesus Church, which is formerly Sacred Heart, and go from there to the Methodist Church and the Presbyterian Church and Christian Science Church. That they're all built 1950s, 1960s. So hence the name Mid-Century Modern. So that should be a good tour. We were really busy yesterday. In fact, we didn't finish at the cemetery with our walking tour until 6:20. And first time I know that Ron and I have done this, it was 63 degrees at the end of the tour. Normally we have 85 degrees at 4 o'clock, and then it cools down to maybe 80 by the time we're at the end. But we were down to 63 at the end. I had to wear a jacket the whole time. It was lovely. It's 60 or 70 plus people. We had some people pay by PayPal and the internet, and we made $1,000. So actually $1,003.94. Okay, so we sold the Hugenstraat book, and we had that for sale here tonight, I think, and that's $20. And then we sold the 120th anniversary book, which is Homes in Redlands, and that is $10. And we gave away Illustrated Redlands, the CD. We're giving that away because most people on their computers no longer have a CD reader, and nor in their desktop computers don't have a CD reader. And besides that, we put the whole thing on our web page. Okay, man, people are using the web page now these days. I had 2 calls today. One quite interesting. I had a call from Denver, Colorado, and a lady wanted to know information about her great-great-grandmother who died in Redlands on May 9th, 1902 in a tally-ho accident. And I said, well, let me look it up. And I got on newspapers.com, and I found in May 10th, 1902, the Redlands Daily Facts covered it, back when they used to actually cover news. Needless to say, I read it to them, and I said, okay, she was in a tally-ho, and she had just come out of England Heights, because they didn't call it Prospect Park then. There wasn't a Prospect Park in 1902. So she came out of England Heights, and the newspaper article said that the tally-ho, the horses pulling the tally-ho were disturbed by the trolley car coming up the street. It was a tight turn. The horses bolted, the tally-ho turned over, and the poor lady was crushed. Okay, there were several little people that were injured, and they were taken to Mound City Hospital. Because in 1902, we don't have the Nordino Hospital yet. We just have the hospital right across here on Vine Street. And it was a pretty small affair, folks. If you went there, that was for broken legs, broken arms. But if you were really in a horrible accident, you needed to have better care, you went to Mound City. They had taken the old hotel that was built in 1887 and they converted it to a hospital. And that remained the hospital for Loma Linda until 1904, and then they started building on to that and expanded it. So we had a really busy week. Our program tonight, of course, is Goes Along the Zanja, and our program in January is going to be Nathan Gonzalez and Marie Carrillo of the Heritage Room coming over and showing us the earliest maps of Redlands and then explaining them. So that should be a good geography explanation to you on the early maps of Redlands. And then in February, I'm coming back to do before and after, finishing what I started, either March or April of last year. I can't remember that far. That's history stuff anyway. Anyway, I'm going to show you before and after homes built at the turn of the century or earlier, and then show you what they look like today. So it's showing you before and after of the homes and how they've changed over the years. And then in March, guess what? March, we're going to go to March 3rd, 1938 and show you the Great Flood of San Bernardino County on March 3rd, 1938. I'm really looking forward to that. I like floods. Okay, and then in April, what's April? Who doesn't know? Huh? Oh, yes. John Paul Beal is going to give us a program on the Gilded Age of Redlands, which should be a biography of the rich and famous of Redlands and how they ripped off the country to get to the wealth that they finally achieved. So Redlands had 1905 more millionaires in this town than any other town of comparable size, which just showed that, you know, we were a millionaire's mecca for a long, long time. So those are things that are hot coming up. January 1st, our new dues fee kicks in at $35. So if you pay between now and December 31, then your fee is $30 for the year, but $35 as of January 1, okay? And if you get a renewal envelope in your mail with your newsletter, that means you're paying, okay? That newsletter comes out stuffed with a renewal, and it has all the different charges for the fees for the Historical Society for the course of the year. Our newsletters cost $1,000 to print each month, a little over $1,000, and then there's the stamps that have to go on, and so that adds to it as well. So our expenses keep rising. The fee for the November 5th walking tour of the mid-century churches is $10 for members and $15 for non-members. And so you can either do PayPal to pay for that, or you can pay right on the site, because we collect enough money and can share back and forth the $5 that we need for the for somebody giving us a 20 or whatever.
What time is that?
2 o'clock. It'll be in the newsletter. Read the newsletter. Actually, there may not be a newsletter before November 5th, because our last newsletter for this year just came out, okay? So it was in the newsletter, plus it was in the Redlands Daily Facts, plus it was in the community news. So you should keep those, cut those out, pin them up on your dresser, or go to bed with it, and then you'll have it anytime you want it, okay? So I'm going to introduce tonight's program. Goes Along the Zanja. Marie Reynolds has been the newsletter producer for the Historical Society, and that is she puts together all the information for the newsletter and has done that for 10 years. She is really a veteran. She did 4th grade tours for a long, long time for all the 4th graders in the Redlands School District, both at the public schools and the private schools and the charter schools. Every one of the 4th graders got a tour of Redlands. She's also the treasurer for Contemporary Club. So she has the keys to this building, knows where all the light switches are, and get the microphone out, because she's special because of the Contemporary Club connection for the Historical Society. So she's given tours as fundraisers, community tours for the 4th grade fundraising, and did hidden neighborhoods of Redlands, especially Redlands Heights. And she's done Eureka Street, 4th Street, everywhere, all up and down town, and basically got buses, loaded people up, and then had 3 or 4 other volunteers take turns talking about various aspects on her tours of Redlands. Made quite a bit of money for that. So she's an expert on Redlands history, okay? In fact, she's also researched and given programs on the history of Mentone. The Reynolds family owned property in Mentone. H.Y. Reynolds had the Mentone newspaper in the 1940s. And then her family at one time owned the site of where Crafton Retreat was located, okay, until about 1886. And then it was finally given to one of the children, and then turned into a sanitarium and stuff. And then it moved along from one space to the next. Okay. I'm going to encourage Zoom attendees to ask questions at the end, and at the bottom of your screen, type it on. You're here, you're not on Zoom, so you can't type on the screen because you don't have one, okay? But then again, when she's pointing and using the pointer on the screen to point out something, the Zoom people can't see that. So we have, flourishing handicaps for both the audience and for the Zoom people at the same time. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Marie and give her a big old applause. She deserves it.
Ready?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Tom. Tonight, I'll be leading you on a tour of the Mill Creek Sankey, because that's what I call it, the Sankey.
That's one debit against her right now.
I can say Sanha, but I'm going to slip and say Sankey throughout the evening. You're welcome. So we're going to start from its origin off of Mill Creek Road above Mentone, then proceed westward to its destination in Loma Linda. Zanja means ditch in Spanish. And as many of you know, the Mill Creek Zanja is a 12-mile-long irrigation ditch dug by Native Americans in 1819 to divert water from the mouth of the Mill Creek and use it to grow crops on the rancheria on Mission Road in Loma Linda. The State Historic Commission listed the Zanja on the State Register of Historic Places in 1932, and in 1977, it was listed on the National Register. Trees, mostly alders, but some sycamores and many willows, were planted by nature the entire length of the Zanja. All kinds of birds, including owls and hawks, nested in the trees. Dr. Marcus Ward and Dr. Elizabeth Farrow, who practiced osteopathy together in San Bernardino, began camping along the Zanja with their families in the early 1900s. Thinking the lovely area would be beneficial to their patients, they constructed a sanitarium on Mill Creek Road in 1915. The sanitarium was successful, and soon a grocery store, restaurant, post office, service station, and several cabins popped up nearby. Unfortunately, in 1919, many of the sanitarium structures were burned down by a man who'd been denied lodging. He attacked Dr. Farrow's husband, clubbed him over the head, then set fire to the place. Just 1 month later, the fiend struck again a quarter of a mile away when the Zanja post office and grocery was burned to the ground. This time, Dr. Farrow was alerted by the flames and tried to shoot the perp, but her gun jammed. After Dr. Farrow's death, her husband operated their house as an inn for a while and then sold it. It became the old homestead rest home where an elderly woman wandered away and drowned in 1942. San Bernardino County bought a nearby ranch to be used as a test TB sanitarium in 1939. Its 4 patients were soon cured and the county sold the property the following year. Operating as the Mentone Health Haven from 1940 into the 60s, it has its share of ghosts. Not only did some people not recover from their ailments, 2 elderly patients were killed here in a 1948 house fire. An October 1993 fire destroyed most of the structures, including the 16-room lodge. And now we're at the Crafton Retreat, named for Myron and Eliza Crafts, Myron Crafts settled along the Zanja in the early 1860s. The house they occupied was located near the southeast corner of East Colton and Crafton Avenues. After a house guest's health was greatly improved by a stay, the Crafts opened their home to lodgers. They called it Crafton Retreat, which soon became a sanitarium and resort and became famous throughout the valley. Myron and Eliza twice enlarged the house, making it and the gardens very attractive. They featured homegrown and home-cooked meals, and their hospitality, good climate, clear air, and the sparkling Zanja gave Crafton Retreat a national reputation. Besides invalids, the Crafts entertained many who came looking for a place to settle. Crafton Retreat operated as a hotel for several years after Myron's sudden death in 1886. By 1907, the property was acquired by George W. Clyde of the Clyde Steamship Lines. He had Redlands builder D.M. Donnell erect this colonial-style mansion in 1910 and called the 10-acre estate Shady Hill. A subsequent owner had it demolished in 1962. The Native Americans who worked for the Crafts had a village north of the retreat. Their homes were constructed of willow branches stitched together and thatched with tules. Their cemetery was located on the northwest corner of Crafton and Colton. The Southern Pacific Crafton Station was built on the site in 1891, and their remains were removed as well. This is the Payne Ranch, and this is the first home of Professor Charles Payne. He and his wife, Mary Craig, came here from Riverside in 1876 and constructed this house at Walnut and East Citrus. Professor Payne planted a variety of crops and became a citrus rancher. The professor had been a teacher back east and soon was the superintendent of San Bernardino County Schools. He was a director of the Crafton Water Company and a packing house manager. This house and the one that followed both burned. The current home was built in 1946. The ranch stayed in the Payne family for over a century. This is Dr. William Craig and his wife, Eliza. They moved here with their daughter, Mary Craig Payne's family from Riverside in 1873. Dr. Craig had a vineyard and also grew apricots. He was a director of the Union Bank and the first justice of the peace of the Crafton Township. The Craig's son Scipio was editor of a Redlands newspaper called the Citrograph. This home stood on Opal Avenue on a hill behind Redlands East Valley High School. It burned, but there is another house on that spot called Red Hill. This is a photo of the Craig and Payne families together at the Craig house. Crafton School was constructed on Wabash and Sylvan Boulevard in 1888. The Zanja provided the school's drinking water. Buckets of the water drawn from the stream were kept in the hall along with an old-fashioned dipper. A shocking crime occurred in 1901 when the body of Francisco Vera was discovered on a footbridge near the school. After getting drunk with a companion, a fight broke out between the two men and Vera was stabbed with a stiletto. The Sankey enters a flood control channel after passing Crafton School. This area is part of the Chicago Colony Reservation, a 1,600-acre purchase by a group of settlers from Illinois, whose origin is reflected in the street names in this area. This photo is of a home belonging to an early Chicago colonist taken in 1898. Sylvan Boulevard was described by an overenthusiastic gentleman from Chicago who declared in an 1887 advertisement that the magnificent broad boulevard is laid out through Lugonia Heights, Chicago Colony, and Crafton, along that beautiful stream, Mill Creek, and is one of the most pleasurable drives in Southern California. An unusual ghost along the Sankey is a 7-foot-long dead shark, weighing more than 100 pounds, discovered in the Sankey at Sylvan and Judson in 1955. I suspect it was some sort of frat prank. This is the Farode House, built in 1888 on Sylvan Boulevard, overlooking the Zanja. Mr. Farode lived in the first story while the upper story was being constructed. He was secretary of both the Domestic Water Company and Redlands Light and Power Company, the latter developing into Southern California Edison. Music teacher, Miss Hazel Robb, purchased the property in 1953. Shockingly, she was found in her kitchen, strangled and stabbed to death in 1984, and she was 80 years old. A subsequent owner reported seeing a woman dressed in black with, quote, something red in the chest area, unquote, in her son's bedroom. She added that the spirit turned off and on the lights, opened and shut doors, and used to borrow women's clothes. The clothing would disappear for a while, then mysteriously reappear in the attic. We're now at Sylvan Boulevard and Grove. Before the university campus was expanded, Lugonia pioneer George A. Cook and his wife Nettie erected this beautiful home in Lugonia Park in 1887. Cook had opened the first store in Redlands, Lugonia. He later built a larger general merchandise store at Colton and Orange, where the westbound on-ramp of the I-10 freeway is today. He was Lugonia's first postmaster and later a bank director and a developer. The Cook Ranch included a deer park along the Zanja, which flowed south of the main house, which is indicated with the yellow arrow. There was much consternation amongst the youngsters in town when the Sankey overflowed in 1895 and the park was washed out and only one fawn survived. The Cooks sold their ranch in 1902 to the Taylor family, who called the property Palmhurst. The house was raised in 1929 and the President's Mansion, now called the Alumni House, was moved to its site. In 1970, a University of Redlands co-ed, Lois Riker, was found murdered in the old orange grove that used to belong to Mr. Cook. Opposite the Cook Mansion on Sylvan Boulevard is the V.L. Barker residence, built in 1892. Mr. Barker and his wife Ellen purchased the entire block and became citrus ranchers. It is currently the University of Redlands Theta sorority house. Tragically, Redlands High School student Paula Hernandez was found murdered in the old orange grove in 1977. This is the Stillman Ranch and Winery, whose vineyard containing 120,000 vines of many choice varieties spanned both sides of Colton Avenue, where the U of R is today. Dr. J.D.B. Stillman was Governor Leland Stanford's personal physician. The Stillman home was originally located on the bluff where the admin building is today, but was moved from the site to become the first women's dormitory, Revis Hall. It was demolished in 1926 to make way for Courier Gymnasium. Stones from the foundation of the winery were used to construct the tall granite wall along University Avenue, which was called East Avenue before the university was on the site. In 1910, the first Sankey Zanja Festival was celebrated, a tradition that continued into the 1980s. The Zanja used to run north of the Greek Theater in front, as you can see here with the little footbridge down at the bottom right. And it was redirected in 1922. This is a 1911 map of the plans for Sylvan Park. The project was financed by an $80,000 bond. The site chosen had been a brickyard, and it and several small cottages along Sylvan Boulevard had to be removed. When it was opened up in when the park was opened in May 1912, it consisted only of the property north of the Sankey. It was beautifully landscaped and included such features as a wading pool, lily ponds, and even an aviary that kept an ostrich for a while. It soon became a popular spot for picnics, barbecues, and family reunions. Sylvan Boulevard divided the park until the city acquired the property south of the Sankey. More features were added: the pine edom, the playground, the Sylvan plunge, a square dancing corral, and lawn bowling green. The plunge opened in 1923 and was refilled with water from the Sankey weekly. A popular event during the summer was the trout chase. Anyone who caught one of the slippery creatures won a ticket to the movies. A flood in 1976 overflowed the Sankey and filled the pool with mud and water. Sylvan Plunge was closed with several claims it would be reopened, but it was finally filled in 1982. When the square dancing craze took off after World War II, the city opened a square dancing corral at the outdoor pavilion just west of Sylvan Plunge. And here are some of the ladies planning an event. Civil War veteran George Redway's house was located on the south side of the Sankey, just east of Church Street. Mrs. Redway, Miss Redway, Miss Dean, the postmistress, and a hired hand are shown in this early photo. Adjacent to the freeway, the house survived intact, but was acquired for flood control in 1967 and demolished. You would not know it today, but the next properties stretched from the Sankey north to the terrace. Reverend J.G. Hale came to town in 1881. He was the pastor of the Terrace Congregational Church nearby when Redlands began asking for an institution to provide their children preparation for college. Reverend Hale opened the Bellevue Academy in his home in 1885 and was its principal until the high school opened in 1892. He died shortly after the school closed its doors. The Terrace Villa Hotel was erected in 1886 by D.L. Clark. It was the first hotel in Lugonia. It had 40 rooms, and there were climbing roses all over the building, which was surrounded by beautiful gardens. Its tower offered extensive views of the mountains and valley that were a great attraction to its guests. It was purchased in 1894 by mining millionaire Anthony G. Hubbard for his wife Laura, and they turned it into their private residence. After the Hubbard's deaths, the mansion was used as Blackwood's Military Academy and later a church. It was raised in the 1960s. Now we're in downtown Redlands at Redlands Boulevard and 9th Street, and it's marked on the map as Water Avenue. Now, following the expulsion of the Chinese from Redlands in 1893, Japanese laborers arrived seeking employment. According to the censuses of 1910 and 20, the Redlands Japanese colony was concentrated here along, at that time it was East Central Avenue, now Redlands Boulevard, and many were housed in this cluster of boarding houses located on what is now the Hatfield Buick car lot. Experienced Japanese field hands came to dominate harvest work in Southern California's citrus industry. In 1915, a group of the Japanese residents gave Redlands 200 cherry trees in honor of the coronation of the Emperor of Japan. Unfortunately, the trees were unable to survive Redlands' climate. Downtown was especially vulnerable to frequent flooding of the Sankey. This was problematic for the many single men who camped along the creek until they could save enough money to buy land and build a house. The campers irritated the citizens who rightly complained about the trash and contamination. The Sankey was soon channeled underground. And here are some pictures of downtown Redlands, and the trees in the background indicate where the Sankey is flowing. The Redlands Fire Department was located. The Sankey was in front of the fire department before it was covered over. It was located across the street from the tartan at 5th and Redlands Boulevard. And you can see the bell tower above behind the building to call the emergencies. This is looking northeast from the Sloan Hotel at Orange and State Streets. And it's looking down at the Union Bank block, which is now the location of Darby's. And in the background, in the distance on the right, you can see the towers, the Terrace Villa Hotel's tower, and next door to it, the Bellevue Academy. Many beautiful homes were erected on Brookside Avenue, named for the Sankey, which flowed at the north end of their properties. One such residence was the home of Mrs. John Davis. Purchased in 1898, Jenny Davis named her property the Alders for the numerous trees which grew alongside the Zanja. She petitioned the city to leave the stream to flow naturally through her backyard long after the rest of the course was already in pipes. The city honored her request until her death. Much later, the house was dismantled and moved to Sierra Way in Fontana. The Zanja flowed within a few feet of the Native American work camp that existed near the northeast corner of Brookside and San Mateo in 1881. They were employed as laborers helping to build early Redlands. The San Bernardino de Estancia was constructed as an outpost of the San Gabriel Mission. Don Antonio Lugo was granted the property from the Mexican government in 1842. One of his sons used the adobe buildings for a home and his headquarters for their cattle ranch. It was a popular tourist attraction. At that time, the property contained 2 kilns and a grist mill. The ruins are shown here on Barton Road between Alabama and Nevada. The Assistencia we see today was a WPA project completed in 1937. And this is the Sankey at Barton Ranch. The Lugos sold their land grant to the Mormons in 1851, and Dr. Benjamin Barton purchased 640 acres from them in 1857. The following year, he built a brick house just south of the Mill Creek Zanja, which you can see flowing below the orchard or vineyard. Subsequent alterations were made, with the mansard roof and tower being added in 1867. Dr. Barton's son Hiram subdivided the ranch in 1887 and used the house as a hotel called Barton Villa. But for the tower having been removed, the mansion looks much the same today. And here's the Barton Villa with the Estancia ruins behind it. And some of the ranch outbuildings with a footbridge across the Zanja. West of the Barton Ranch Mission Road links California Avenue to Mountain View. It was once called Cottonwood Row, or named for the cottonwood trees that lined the banks of the Sankey. It was also called Old San Bernardino. There was a Native American village near the end of the road called Wachama. And during the mission era, the Spaniards directed the Indians to construct the Mill Creek Zanja in order to irrigate their fields here. After the Spaniards and Mexicans left the area, Mormons purchased the lands and in 1852 formed the settlement of Old San Bernardino. When the Mormons were recalled to Utah in 1857, some Mormons remained along Mission Road. In 1888, the San Bernardino and Redlands Railway Company built a 10-mile-long narrow gauge line between San Bernardino and Redlands. And you can see the map of the Redlands Motor Road. A locomotive pulled 1 or 2 cars and sometimes 3 on special occasions. Later called the Motor Row, it was known as the Dinky and continued operating until 1916. William Curtis and his wife Mary, along with their 5 children, traveled to California in a covered wagon in 1861. Upon arriving in San Bernardino, Curtis prospected for a while, then settled into a house on Cottonwood Row in 1867. A previous owner had planted 7 acres of grapes along with citrus and walnuts. About 1886, William built a modern home of 2 stories. It burned and was replaced by another modern home in 1962. As the Curtis Ranch expanded to 120 acres, sons Jeremiah, Newell, and Robert each built homes on nearby Orange Avenue. Son George built his home on Colton Avenue, which is called Redlands Boulevard today. And youngest son Eli built his home on California Street in 1896. Eli's house recently joined his brother Robert's at the Loma Linda Heritage Park. Captain Nathaniel Pichon, an Indian fighter, bought a 60-acre parcel in 1858 for $900. He sold it to Carolyn Tuttle for the same amount and promptly married her. He built them a 2-story square brick home and planted peaches, apples, grapes, and citrus and field crops. The Pichons sold the ranch to Frank and Lottie Hinckley in 1883. Hinckley, an engineer, immediately began improvements to the house and property. He added a wing to the west of the house, a cupola, and an ornamental grillwork. He constructed a water tower at the rear of the residence with a water wheel that pumped water from the Sankey up to the tank and into the house, becoming the first home in the area with piped water inside. A small adobe called the Milk House was built nearby, where the cold water ran through the basement, keeping the perishables stored above cool. He also constructed a small building that housed a gas machine, which piped gas into the home when others in the area were using kerosene. The large house had 3 fireplaces, and the one in Lottie's room was bordered with Italian tiles picturing Mother Goose stories. The family was served by 2 Chinese cooks and 2 upstairs maids. A dressmaker came twice a year to make clothes for the Hinckley's 10 children. There was a waterfall at the back door of the house with an arbor covered with vines and roses, where the family would gather on Sunday afternoons for watermelon or ice cream. The place was famous for his 660-foot-long rose hedge of many varieties and colors. Each year, people came from miles around to see them in bloom. The ranch employed 3 to 4 ranch hands plus seasonal workers. Mr. Hinckley constructed a 2-story bunkhouse that featured a dance hall upstairs, a novelty known as Hinckley Hall. There was also a China house where the Chinese workers lived, and a smokehouse for curing meat, and a glass house for propagation. There was a large barn where citrus packing was done before there were any packing houses in the area. They also cured their own olives. Frank Hinckley died in 1890 and Lottie 10 years later. Many of their children continued to live on and operate the ranch. In 1915, a fire destroyed 3 buildings on the ranch, including a large hay barn and the dance hall. The mansion was spared, but by 1919, it was considered outdated and was torn down. There were several other residences at the Hinckley Ranch, including Nathan Hinckley's house, built in 1904. He was the eldest of the Hinkley's 10 children. When he died in 1960, he had outlived all his siblings. In 1990, after being boarded up for decades, it was opened as a homeless shelter and later a refuge for battered women and their families. Horace Monroe Frank was an Indian scout and ran freight through the San Mateo Canyon to Arizona with his brother. After living in the canyon for years, Frank built this adobe home in 1874, the same year he died. His descendants stayed in the house for the next century. Frank's son Alonzo and his wife Lorena Van Leuven had this home built on the south side of Mission Road across from the parents' adobe. It was later destroyed by fire. And this is the Alonzo and Lorena Frank's granddaughter, who lived at the Frank adobe after the other house burned down. Bushrod Wilson and Catherine Anderson were Mormons who left Spanish Fork, Utah in December 1853. A harrowing 42 days later, they arrived and purchased an adobe house. Bushrod operated a general merchandise store on his place and engaged in farming. Their eldest son, Joseph, worked in the store with his father. Joseph married Rhoda Van Leuven and purchased his own ranch to the east of his parents, planting fruits, grapes, alfalfa, and grains. The Wilsons sold their dried fruit to passing traders and miners and became very successful. Joseph met his death when he was struck by the dinky in front of their house in 1899. And it wasn't the first time he'd been hit. He was as deaf as a post and couldn't hear the train coming. The first time he was hit slightly and just knocked silly. The second time it reduced his wagon to splinters. And the third time he was out. The first school in the Old Mission District was held in a one-room building behind the Wilsons' residence. As the area grew, a new schoolhouse was needed. Mission School was built on the south side of Mission Road in 1881 and cost $1,500. And you can see the tracks of the dinky running in front of the schoolhouse. It was replaced by this new building in 1904. This structure remained until a flood surrounded the building with 2 distinct rivers of mud, and the school trustees decided that a new site was needed. The new Mission School is on California and Colton Avenue, now Redlands Boulevard. The Cole family had a home on Cottonwood Row. Their ranch extended from Cottonwood to Colton Avenue, where there was another residence belonging to the family. That home was also moved to Heritage Park in Loma Linda. Just west of the Cole Ranch was the site of the Wachama Rancheria, located near the end of Cottonwood Row. A marker that indicated the spot was stolen, but you can tell where it was because it's near the electric towers, the power lines. Now we come to the end of Mission Road as it reaches Mountain View. Anson Van Leuven and family arrived with the Mormon wagon train. He planted the first citrus grove in San Bernardino County on his ranch here. The Van Leuven's first home burned down in 1868 after the stovepipe caught fire. Anson and his wife Elizabeth then molded thousands of bricks, fired them, and built this large house. Unfortunately, one of their daughters dropped dead of a heart attack while walking to Mission School one morning. You can see the Van Leuven home at 10664 Mountain View Avenue in Loma Linda. It's been restored and is now the office and clubhouse for an apartment complex. With the exception of the empty and boarded up Frank adobe, every one of these early settlers' homes on Mission Road are gone. All that remains are their ghosts. And that concludes tonight's presentation. Thank you.
If there's any questions? Sure, go ahead.
Many of the properties burned. What was the general problem?
I think they were a little too far from the fire station. Oh, many of the properties burned. What was the problem is the question. And my answer is I think they were too far. And volunteer firefighters probably.
And you have wood burning stoves or coal in your house and candles and kerosene lamps, and all those can start fires.
And wood houses.
Wood houses and a wood stove. Good luck.
And maybe back then, no chimney sweeps because your chimney is gonna get clogged up and you can have chimney fire, so.
And we couldn't send the kids down the chimneys to clean them out here.
Any other questions?
She shared.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that the Frank Adobe is being restored and they're building a heritage park around it. And it was lived in for till 1968.
Yes. The Sherry Forbes is mentioning that the Frank adobe, the only remaining of the early pioneer, early settlers on Cottonwood Row, is going to be restored, and Heritage Park will surround it, which already has several other structures in it right now. But it's very, let's hope nothing happens to it before it can be fully restored.
Yes.
Yes, Mom.
The Dinky Trail for the railroad from San Bernardino to Redlands, is it the same one as the new railroad?
Is the Dinky line from San Bernardino to Redlands going to use the same route as the new line that was held the grand opening last weekend?
That's the Santa Fe tracks.
I'll let Tom answer this question.
Okay, the arrow line is going to use the Santa Fe route coming from the 1919 Santa Fe Depot in San Bernardino and coming to Redlands on the right of way that they received in 1888. Okay, in fact, Judson and Brown did a fundraiser and collected $57,000 to buy the property easements all the way through to Redlands, and then donated the land for the depot, and of course encouraged the railroad, the Santa Fe, to build her in 1888. And of course, then we didn't have any citrus that were really in full production. And so Santa Fe was risking a great deal because other than who wants to come to Redlands in 1888, but it put us on the map and caused the boom for the property on Orange Street, State Street to go real way up high in value from $4 an acre all the way up to $250 a lot.
Are there any questions on Zoom?
Are there any questions on Zoom?
Yeah. Check the
Well,
chat.
I don't know how to do that. Where did Frank Hinckley make his money? Well, he had been a rancher prior to moving to Redlands, and his wife was very wealthy too.
How did Frank Hinckley make his money? He designed and built all of the railroad connections, a little town called Oakland. And so both Southern Pacific and Santa Fe are indebted to him, but all of the docks along the Oakland line of the San Francisco Harbor, he designed all of those, and then had designed how the railroads would get in and out to service all the freight that was coming in from the Orient. And so he made his money there. He had members of his family that had tuberculosis, so he moved to Southern California to help members of his family help recover their health. He had enough money not only to refashion home that he purchased in 1883. But he also donated the land where Lugonia School was rebuilt in 1885 on the corner of Orange and Lugonia Avenue. So he owned all the land that became Washington Street, Calhoun, and Clay.
Yes.
Do we have any evidence or records of the time period and the payment to Native Americans who dug the Zanja?
I would not know.
I've heard two different accounts. One is that we were so lucky they helped us dig it. And then I've also heard that was slave labor.
I'll let Tom answer your question, and I hope you can repeat it too.
Okay, how were the Native Americans paid for the building of the Zanja in 1819? Okay. And the questioner had said, were they slave labor? Well, first of all, we don't know if it was Serrano or Cuhia that built the Zanja. I guess it was Gabriano because they could speak some Spanish and they brought with them shovels from Mission St. Gabriel. And the engineer, the surveyor that was there had some experience on where to build the Zanja so it'd be gravity flow to Guachama. The Native Americans wanted the ditch dug. They dug it willingly and didn't have to be slave labor. But the accusation that Native Americans were slaves, well, to some degree, when you joined Mission St. Gabriel, you gave up your personal freedom to live on anywhere you wanted to live. You had to stay at the St. Gabriel mission. And males and females were separated at night for sleeping quarters, which was, well, if you're a family, it's kind of cuts down on birth rate because men and women are not together. And that was a negative. But the food was tremendous, okay? Wheat flour for making bread and corn and squash and all kinds of other food they didn't have out here in the Seminole Valley. Grinding away on acorns to make acorn meal and, you know, getting your occasional lizard and trapping coyote and gophers and snakes. After a while, that menu, you have to chase after it and you don't always get it. So the food at Mission St. Gabriel was excellent. But the problem was not so much that they were not paid when they worked for Mission St. Gabriel. The problem was that if you lived on the mission, your chance of living more than 10 years was rather small because the missions depended upon soldiers, Spanish soldiers, to come in and protect the missionaries. And the Spanish soldiers, well, if you were stationed in good old California, anytime in this early period, you were a penal colony person who requested to get out of jail to go work in California. And so these gentlemen that were arriving in Southern California working at the missions brought with them gonorrhea, syphilis, and other kinds of diseases, which they quickly spread among the Native American women. And so many women died within 5 years after contact. So very quickly, if you lived out here in the hinterlands, you found out that your relatives that are Gabriano and other Native Americans were dying like flies at Mission St. Gabriel. And so you wanted to retain living at Guachama or in the Native American areas in this area so that you'd be healthy and you could retain your religion and you could retain your customs, their way of dress and everything else, because the mission padres did enforce that the women had to wear full clothing and the men had to wear full clothing and all that, and they had to become Catholics. Well, what does a Native American know about the Catholic religion? Only what the Spanish priests told them and stuff. And so the freedom that you would have here is what got the Native Americans say, we want the food, we want the quality, we want to be taught farming. So Pedro Alvarez came out and became a teacher of the Seminole Valley, teaching the Native Americans, first of all, how to build a Zanja, And secondly, how to irrigate and plant all these crops. And they built an in Ramada right on Mission Road, adobe, that went in, had a place for Pedro Alvarez to live. But every day he went out and taught the Indians how to irrigate and how to build the irrigation ditches and everything else. Remember, when they were irrigating in 1820, they had the full flow of Mill Creek. And in the spring, that's a mighty lot of water. I mean, you're going to be able to fill a swimming pool every 5 minutes. So it's a lot of water. So they had to have ditches coming off and then have a way to irrigate vast areas of land, but they were able to do that. And so that was a willing thing that the Native Americans did. And each spring they had to go up and rebuild the diversion dam on Mill Creek so that the water would flow down the Zanja. And of course, willingly doing that. And of course, same thing with Native Americans who work for Myron Crafts and other people in the area. They're getting food. And in case of Myron Craft, he's giving you script so that you wouldn't have to go to San Bernardino because you ended up buying liquor. And they didn't want you buying liquor. He wanted you to go to his trading post and get the items you need. And then when you left his place in the late fall, you carried away huge leg of lambs, you carried away ham, you carried away peaches, plums, apricots, dried fruit, everything else, because that was already negotiated with Chief Cabazon on how much you'd be paid per family. And so they were happy campers. So they came down each spring to do the planting and harvesting and everything, and stayed right adjacent to Myron Craft's home on what they called Indian Ditch, which was just a branch of the Zanja that they directed down that paralleled East Colton Avenue. So I don't see or read about anything slavery, except of course Mission Indians that are working at San Gabriel Mission. Their pay is the food and the quarters that are provided, but then they're taught all of the architectural work to build the missions and all the buildings they're living in. And they're taught to run the blacksmith shops, everything. They're basically citizens of Spain. And the idea eventually is that Mission San Gabriel will just become a community church and a new mission would be built inland. And supposedly that new mission would be the Assistencia, except the Assistencia never got beyond the stage of being a cattle ranch headquarters, a cattle ranch headquarters for Mission San Gabriel. Once again, the vaqueros are Native Americans, the cowboys are Native Americans, and taught how to run the cattle ranch and everything, and then when to butcher the cattle and how to take the hides off. And if you read Richard Henry Dana's 2 years before the mass, they'll tell you how the hide industry in Southern California was massive. And the hides were then sold to Yankees off the coast and then taken around all the way to the tip of South America up to Boston and turned into belts and saddles and all the accoutrements necessary for leather products. But the leather came from California. Any others?
We have some online questions.
Okay, online questions.
So what's the size of the Hinckley house?
What's the size of the Hinckley house?
It was really big.
At least 4,000 square feet.
I
What was
would
the
think.
size of the Hinckley house? At least 4,000 square feet.
If we wanted to see the beginning and the end of the Zanja, where would we go?
Go ahead.
Okay, the beginning of the Zanja, if you know where the Redlands Electric Light and Power Company powerhouse is, and you stop right at Highway 38 and look at the powerhouse, look a little to the southwest and down, and you'll see a hole in the wall, and you'll see a pipeline coming from the powerhouse. The pipeline, when the powerhouse was put in 1893, the powerhouse water goes right to the Zanja, and it goes through a hole in the wall. The wall was built after the 1938 flood, and they had to have the hole so that the Zanja would continue to flow. And now the water goes to the Tate filter plant And then you wash with it, drink it, run your showers with it, and use it today.
You've got, is Hinckley near Barstow named after Frank Hinckley?
Is Hinckley near Barstow? Oh, the town of Hinckley? I never researched that. Is the town of Hinckley next to Barstow, connected to the Hinckleys here? Don't know. I just think we got more Hinkleys running around.
And Susan says different,
Remember
they're
that
spelled
Frank
differently.
Hinckley, yes, and that Hinckley is spelled differently. Frank has 10 kids. The Van Leuvens had 12 for 3 generations in a row. You know, once you get in a rut, you're in the same rut. You gotta keep doing it. Okay, now I'd like to invite Nelda Stuck to give you some information.
I got one more question.
Oh, okay.
It's a good one.
Uh-oh.
Oh, good one.
Are there any actual hauntings that you can speak of?
Are there any actual hauntings that you can speak of?
No, but I have heard that Redlands is a very, very haunted city.
Are there any hauntings that you can speak of? Well, I was asked by a group of people out of Los Angeles about 5 years ago if they could come to Hillside Cemetery because they'd been on one of the tours. I wanted to know if it was haunted. And I said, I'm into history, not into, storytelling and stuff. And I said, they said they'd pay me $200 that they donate to the Historical Society if I could get the city of Redlands to leave the cemetery open for from midnight to 2 a.m. I said yes, stupidly, and I went up with them, and they had, there was like 60 of them, and I said, you got to have flashlight. There's no lights on in here. And I had them sign a document that said that the city of Redlands was not responsible for any of them breaking their necks as they're walking around. And they had contraptions that looked like Geiger counters, and they had all kinds of wizardry types of things, and looked like, I don't know, metal finders, you name it. And they said, well, where would you suspect the most ghosts would be? And I said, nowhere. I was not very helpful for my $200. And needless to say, they said, well, what about the Veterans Circle? I said, okay, the Veterans Circle is right down here. And I showed them where it was. And they went down there and they came back all smiling and said it was wonderful. And then I said, okay, there's the World War II Veterans Lane. And I said, but there are no bodies buried there. That is American soldiers that were from Redlands who were killed, but their graves are in France or in the Pacific Ocean, or wherever they were buried, but they're not here. And so that's fine. And they went down there and they came back smiling, and they wanted to do it again. I said, maybe if you contact Ron Running. And I gave them his telephone number, and needless to say, it's not ringing off the hook. So he would have really hung me if he thinks it. So I'm not into zombies or ghosts or anything like that, because you know what? They don't leave any documents, and I have to have actual proof. Sorry, I'm not into conspiracies. Yes.
When I was a freshman, I remember we used to go up to the Hillside Cemetery, and there was a huge foundation of an old house, and we would go under the foundation and poop around, you know.
It's the green.
That's the greenhouse.
Haunted, which I never thought.
Wasn't the cemetery, it was on Crown.
That was the Colonel Green's Mansion Foundation. It was 3 stories high. It was built at the top of Crown on Sunset between Crown and Serpentine. And in the 50s, it became too dangerous. Kids were going in there and getting hurt. Yeah, tramps and whatnot were living in there. So they tried to tear it down, but had a real difficult time and ended up bulldozing most of the structure over the side of Sunset into the canyon. So you can still see some of the rusty rebar sticking out there. It's not rebar, I don't know. Okay, Nelda?
Thank you for 2 brief announcements.
Our sister organization, the Museum of Redlands, is, I consider a sister organization with our Historical Society. We have 4 more days of the sale that's going on in the Greenspot building, and I have a few flyers here for you. I think prices might be marked down for the second week, but it is a huge sale and you don't really want to miss it. The other thing I want to have you put on your calendars is that we will be starting our museum programs up again after the COVID hiatus, and it will be 2 weeks from this Sunday on November 13th here at 2 o'clock, when my husband Monty will share with you some of the photos that he's been taking for 22 months of the construction of the museum. And what made me feel especially good was you had that one picture of the Greek theater, and it looked like construction going on there. Well, part of the problem was when we got the Fax building to make the museum, the construction plans weren't to be found. And we did research in 1956 in the Fax, and they weren't running pictures at that time. Took too much trouble to make a zinc plate and run a picture in the newspaper. So there was very little to show for it. So this is what made us feel that we really wanted to document what was going on there. And so in 50 years, for those of you who come back here, you can see some of these photos, just like these old photos that we have here. So that's 2 weeks from Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight. Our Christmas party is December 7th, and we're going to be in the oldest house in Redlands. It's called the Barton Villa on Nevada Street.
9th, September 9th, or
Oh.
December 9th.
9th of December. Oh, 9th, not 7th? Okay, 9th of December at 6 o'clock. And if I have my way, and I'm going to keep pushing for it, I want the taco truck. So also there are goodies to drink and eat back in the back here that Thomas and Junie have prepared for you. There's a table of stuff and items. So they don't want to take that stuff home. So go back there, glug away and chomp away. Good night.
That was great. Picture.
Oh,
I have a picture.
oh yeah. I don't think they want me to sit.
Because I got both of them at the same
Yeah.
time.
Where is she? Did you get it?
She married one of Frank Hinckley's
No, I got it from
sons.
the library.
So I have a picture of the ten.
I'll change it in there.
Yeah, that children was who she married. That was great.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't want to know what the Indian chief, Juan Antonio, is the one that supervised the Indians when they were planted. Yes. And I believe they worked with Bill and some sorority.
I think so too.
Yeah. His reaction.
Well, but no, Juan Antonio was 1850s. We're talking 1819.
No, I know that. Yet later on, he supervised the planting. Anyway.
I do too. Tom took this one.
What house is that? What's that?
It's one of the Curtis homes.
No, gone.
Huh?
Is it gone?
It was moved to the Heritage Park.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so there's one in my. So that's kind of an interesting sign.
Yes, okay, good. Thank you.
You did a great job.
Yeah, she did.
Great
Thank
job.
you.
There's in the Indian burial ground up on Colton and Crafton,
Yeah.
where the chief was buried.
No, Chief Juan Antonio was buried out in San Mateo Canyon. He was died during the smallpox epidemic.
Well, I was under the impression, because we live across the street from the Craft property,
Uh-huh.
the chief was buried on the corner down there where Edison was.
No.
And when they started development down there, they were digging up the ground and everything. I called the supervisor's office and the museum,
No,
They
the,
came back and told me it was buried behind the Crafton store, which was across the street.
no. They even found his grave when the county was building a flood control ditch near Fisherman's Retreat. And I found the belt buckle that he was given by the citizens of San Bernardino when he protected the area from Paiutes that were raiding the area. And I found the epaulettes from his jacket, so they knew it was his.
So but there was an Indian burial ground though on the northwest corner.
Yes, but the graves, when Southern Pacific bought that property, they bought it from the Crass family, and they were required to move the graves of the Native Americans there. And in this, they moved some of them down to Temecula to an Indian grave site there, and some out to Morongo.
Well, what the museum said was inaccurate.
Yes. Well, they hadn't researched it like we have. Okay.
There used to be the old packing houses over there
Yeah.
and old depot.
I researched all the packing house on Colton Avenue. They're all part of that time period.
But you said it was out by Fisherman's Street when they found him?
Yeah. Yeah.
When they find him?
I want to say in the 1970s, the late 70s.
Okay.